Hi, everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. By now, it's a cliche to state that 2020 was an awful year for just about everybody. But it needs to be noted that for Phish, 2020 was not a total loss. Let's remember that for 4 all too brief days in February of 2020, Phish played 4 nights at the Moon Palace Resort in Cancun, Mexico. I was lucky enough to attend these shows, and as the pandemic set in almost immediately after they were played, I frequently went back to the pictures I took at the resort, re-listened to those 4 nights, and would constantly text the friends who were also there. After scrolling through the pictures of Mexico for about the millionth time, I decided that rather than simply look at Mexico 2020 and listen to it, it would be best to talk about and remember the event with my other friends who were there. So today, in recognition of 1 year since Phish last took the stage, here is the Attendance Bias Mexico 2020 Roundtable. Today, I'm joined by my friends Greg, Cappy, and Chase to talk about the Moon Palace Resort, the oddity of wearing shorts on the beach in February, and of course, the best live music of the year. So pack your bags, bring your sunscreen, and decide which pool is right for you as we go back to February 20th through 23rd to Cancun, Mexico for Phish at Riviera Maya. All right, everybody, welcome to Attendance Bias. This is a very special episode. It's the first time we've had multiple guests on Attendance Bias, and we are here for a very special occasion as well. By the time of the airing of this episode, it will be approximately 1 year since Phish last took the stage at Riviera Maya, the Moon Palace in Cancun, Mexico. And it was an extremely special and eventful run for the band. I would argue probably their best Mexico run yet. And rather than just have one guest on, I thought it would be better to have a roundtable discussion because this event was so big. It had so much going on. And if any sort of Phish event includes attendance bias, it's this one. So in recognition of 1 year gone by without any Phish, today is the day to remember, to recall, to reminisce. And so welcome to Nostalgia Town. This is Attendance Bias, Phish and Riviera Maya 2020. So I am your host, Brian Weinstein, and I have 3 guests with me. We'll go around and introduce ourselves. Let's just say hello, guys. How you doing? Greg, how are you?
Fantastic. Good to see you. Who am I? I'm Greg. I'm just a normal, everyday guy. Businessman by day and a free-loving guy on the weekends.
And where are you from right now?
I'm in a little town called Moyock in North Carolina, right outside the Virginia Beach area.
Cappy?
Hey, everyone. Cappy here. My Cappilino is the name, but everyone knows me by Cappy, both in real life and in the virtual world as well. So I've been a Phish fan for a while. I live up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is about an hour north of Boston.
And Chase, take us home.
My name's Chase. I'm coming from Queens, New York right now by way of Chicago, but I just moved here. Been into the band for, 25 years. I just wanted to acknowledge that Brian did that Wayne's World silent countdown thing at the beginning of this podcast. I think it's important to mention.
Yeah, and all 3 of you were nodding your heads just like Wayne and Garth, so I had to start all over again. But I'm Brian Weinstein, as I said earlier, also in Queens. And it should be noted right at the outset that the 4 of us do know each other from a Phish message board that we've all been posting on for many years. So before we get into Mexico, let's talk a little bit about how we each got into the band. Cappy, you might have been seeing them longer than anyone else here. So what's your Phish origin story?
It was back in 91 that I first crossed paths with them, but I don't think it's fair to say I saw them.
Okay.
Because it turned out I had no idea what I was going to. I was going to a campsite at Arrowhead Ranch to hang out with friends. And, I was 15 years old and I was going to drink beers and there was a girl I liked that was going. And then it turns out there was a band there, but I really have no recollection of it.
And that's in July 91, right? Those are some famous shows.
They are. And so I was present, but not aware. And I had several friends in my life who were into them, like in and out from probably 1990 to 92. But the first time I saw them intentionally was in 93. And then by senior year in high school, So I graduated in 94. By then I was able to start having a little more freedom and driving to see some of the shows, and basically started spending all of my free time and all of my money trying to see shows through the end of 1.0. And then for 2.0 and beyond, I wanted to make an effort to basically see one show every year. So I managed to get to one show every year. I think the only gap was I think it might have been 2015 that I didn't get a chance to see them. It was actually very close considering what happened in 2020, but 2020 helped keep it so there's only 1 year gap since I missed since 93.
Well, now we all have the distinction of saying that each one of us has seen every Phish show in a given calendar year. We all saw every show in 2020. Greg, what about you? What's your Phish origin?
Yeah, so imagine end of summer 92, my parents dropped me off at college, and within an hour, I had found myself in a dorm room with a bunch of deadheads doing deadhead stuff. You know, I was heavy metal guy all the way, 100%. And at some point, one of these guys put on a CD and he started playing it. And he said, "Hey, this is the band everybody's going to start following when the Dead's not around." And he queued up Poor Heart, and he thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I remember looking at this guy like, "You are crazy." And so for the next 4 years of college, I missed opportunity after opportunity to be exposed to them and go see them. And, had a friend try to drag me in summer 94 to go see them. And I said, nah, never mind. And just by chance, a couple of months after I graduated, I found myself perusing a used CD shop. You know, they used to have those back in the day where you could actually go thumb through things. And I pulled out the disc. I said, I remember this. This is what that guy played me. And I looked at it and said, oh, yeah, I remember that song. I was like, it was $3. I said, why not? I'll buy it. And I popped it in my car stereo. And by the time it got 20 seconds into Stash, I said, oh, my God, what is this? I can't believe that I have missed out. If he had played Stash for me in 1992, I probably would have dropped out of college. I for sure would have spent every dime that I had at that point to go see them. And, it was a few months after that, I saw my first show at Hampton Coliseum in 96. I've been in ever since. This is kind of the Hampton, Virginia Beach area has been my hometown area, and that's where I've done most of it.
And Chase, how about you?
Yeah, so when those two started touring, I guess I was probably 9 or 10 years old. But during that time, I'm from Minnesota originally, spent my summers on the South Jersey Shore. And a buddy of mine there actually introduced me to the band. I think the first song he played me was Way, which is an interesting intro to the band. I was instantly hooked. Obviously, Phish doesn't come around to Minnesota all that often. That was maybe 94 or 95. I was trading tapes, doing all that stuff from a very young age, and ended up seeing them when they came in October 2nd, 1999 at the Target Center in Minneapolis.
And for anyone who's been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know my origin story. Very briefly, in about 1996, I was on a camping trip to the White Mountains from a summer camp. I was, I think, 13 years old at the time. And just like Greg was mentioning, the driver played a Picture of Nectar for me. And every song on that album just grabbed me. I wanted to hear every track, made me want to listen to the next track. And it's a long album, so I had a lot of built up excitement. And then once it got to the 10th track, Glide, I was all in. It sold me for life. And the minute I got home from camp that summer, I bought a Picture of Nectar. And I was very fortunate that there was a head shop in my area where they sold tapes, which I know technically it was against the Phish taping policy, but they would charge you $1 for the tape, plus I guess $3 was the cost of a blank, and then it was like $1 man hours. So anytime I had an extra $5, I would take the train 4 stops down to Prime Cuts in Rockwell Center, built up my tape collection for about a year, read everything I could about the band. First saw them on December 29th, 97, and I've been in full throttle ever since. A little bit of background information about Mexico, 2020, that is. Phish played at the Moon Palace Resort, which was the first time they played at this new location. It was from February 20th to 23rd. The first night had a what would you guys say, about 2.5 hour long welcome set? It was about the same length of a regular Phish show in terms of the amount of music, just with no set break, one long set of music, and then 2 sets each subsequent night. And then the last night, the 23rd, started early, right? It started about 5:30 or 5 o'clock, and the night ended early, but it was, for all intents and purposes, it was 4 shows. And it was the first time in this new venue, and I think it was the first time that they played 4 nights. So it was a little bit of a change from previous Mexico runs. I had never been to one before, and it was one of the best Phish experiences I've ever had, arguably the top, depending on what day you ask me. It was very expensive. There's no way around that. It's a very expensive undertaking. It requires a lot of forethought, a lot of planning. And so that's the first question I wanted to throw out to the group. At what point did you decide, yes, I'm going to this, and committed to the trip? Chase, when did you decide that you were absolutely going?
Before they announced it. And yeah, that first set actually, which we'll talk about later, was actually over 3 hours on that opening night. But yeah, I always wanted to make the trek down to Mexico. And, I just thought to myself, when am I going to do this? It's talking to all my buddies, everybody's kind of like, yeah, we'll do it next year. And I just said, you got to pull the trigger on this thing or you're never going to do it. And I did. And Brian, you and I were kind of in the same camp, right? Mm-hmm. We ended up staying together because nobody else wanted to go. It's significantly cheaper, obviously, to share a room with somebody else. Before the announcement, I was anticipating, I'm like, all right, got to get on there and snag a room immediately.
Cappy, when did you decide that you were all in on this?
So all in was probably around June, the summer before. I remember having the first conversation with my wife at the pool and saying, like, I really want to do this. Every time that they've done it in the past, I've said, I have to do that. Next time I'm going to do that. But we have young kids. And so this was the first time when they were old enough that we could leave them for an extended period. And so it was my wife and I, it was our first vacation without kids. So we had that nice 8 months of anticipation of leading up to that. And I remember saying, like, financially, I'm like, we'll just figure this out. Like, we're going to make it a priority to be able to do this. And like, this is going to be our Christmas present and anniversary present and birthday present all together. Because it is not inexpensive, but it is well worth it.
And Greg, how did you know that you were absolutely going to it this year on Mexico 2020?
We went in 2019, and it was the best time of our lives. But it was expensive, as you mentioned. And I think we were actually teetering on not going in 2020 because my daughter was now out of school, and she had discovered Phish on her own in 2018. So I knew I was paying for a third person, kind of on the outs. And my cousin reached out to me, and he said, hey, him and his sister, we're going. We want you to go. Let's all get a room together. And I said, what the hell? We didn't get a room together, but I'm so glad we went because it was just, the time of our lives. I know, like you guys had, it's a one of a kind experience. And at that point,
thank fucking God that we went. I mean, right?
I say it every day.
Yeah, not just the only Phish shows of 2020, but absolutely the best shows, period, of 2020 by anyone.
I decided that I was absolutely going a little more than a year in advance in the summer of, less than a year. I can't do math, but in the summer of 2019, I was selling my house. And once a deal got locked in, once I accepted a bid and contracts were signed, and I kind of knew approximately how much money it was going to be coming in, my father said to me, don't be stupid with it. Talking about the money. That was like his only, no congratulations. No, I'm happy for you. It was just, don't be stupid when you sell the house. And I said back to him almost immediately, I'm going to be stupid before I'm smart with it. And so I promised myself to take a little slice of the money, and it's just all going toward Phish in Mexico. And I felt like I was making a huge life change. I was selling a house in the suburbs and moving to an apartment in the city. I was saying goodbye to a big part of my life and closing a chapter. And Mexico was something I've always wanted to do. I've never been to a luxury resort before. And what could make it better, an all-inclusive resort, than my favorite band for 4 nights in a row? And like you mentioned earlier, Chase, I had no one really to go with. And I'm glad that you and I connected, because the single rooms, they sold out immediately. And not only did they sell out immediately, but they're the most expensive ones. It was like 5,000 plus if you were going by yourself. And I think that would cross my dad's threshold of being stupid with the money, and I didn't want to do that. So I decided about, a couple months before that once I sell my house, that's one of the first things I'm doing with the money.
Yeah. I mean, who's laughing now, Dad, right? It's the best decision you ever made. Life's too short, as this, last year has shown us, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's something that I'll remember forever, and something I'll be forever grateful that I chose to do. Greg, I know you said that you'd been to Riviera Maya in 2019. So what were your expectations coming into 2020?
Well, it's funny. I try to always go to the Phish shows without expectations. One of the things I'm hoping is I'm going to see things I've never seen before, and they always pay off. But really, we had such a blast in 2019 because, my wife went with me. She's kind of a developing fan, but being on the beach is her favorite thing. So it was like our worlds came together. Quite honestly, the music in 2019 was probably the best I've seen in 3.0. I mean, there were these huge surprises, Soul Planet into Spanish Moon the first night. There was a great Set Your Soul Free Mercury into Slave on the second night. I mean, there was so much energy around it. All I hoped for was that we would even come close to that, and I would get a couple of those moments in 2020.
And Cappy, as you mentioned, your wife came with you, right? It was a adults only, leave the kids at home trip. How into it was she?
So she's been a passenger fan since we met. So we've been together since 2000. Funny side story there is, like, about a month after we started dating, I had extras to Great Woods in September of 2000, and I asked her if she wanted to go, and she said yes. And for some reason, what I heard was no, and so I wound up going to that show without her. And we talked afterwards. She's like, "No, I totally would have gone." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, we mixed that up. Don't worry, we'll catch him on the next tour." And
in 2000, yeah.
Yeah. And then they announced hiatus less than a month later. So we wound up going. We caught Worcester in 2003. She went. She really liked it. We saw it together. We saw Coventry together, a few shows in 2004. But
that sounds like the start to a tragedy right there.
Yeah. So
this 2000 and then saw Coventry together.
Yeah. And so she's been a fan, but not the way I am.
And so if you're going to take your first trip as a couple without kids, and you're trying to sell it for what I think amounts to a festival, a Phish festival, even though it's like the most highbrow Phish festival that ever could be, how do you sell that to someone who, as you called, a passenger fan? That if you're going to take your first trip, and you guys have 3 kids, right? So this is a big vacation. So how do you, if you have your shot to take it, how did she agree to it being for Phish?
I wore her down. It was like she was 100% in for me going. And the question was whether or not is she going to go? And I just kept saying, I'm like, this is really important to me. I'd really want to do this. And so, like, if we can find a way, I would really like for that to happen. And she said yes. I've always said this is not, we're not going to a Phish festival, and it happens to be in Mexico. I always say, like, we're going to Cancun to an all-inclusive resort vacation. And it just so happens that on 4 of those nights, Phish will be playing there.
Since you brought it up, Cappy, that it's not just a Phish festival, but it's an all-inclusive resort. And by the way, Phish is there performing all 4 nights. This was a major all-inclusive resort. Chase, what were your thoughts when you first arrived?
I would preface it by saying that all-inclusives are absolutely of no interest to me. They never really have been. I think I'd been to one before. If I'm traveling, I like to go and actually experience the place. And I think the all-inclusive sort of takes away from that. Immediately upon landing in Cancun, that pretty much drifted away. The plane was full of heads. Great time. Just even arriving at O'Hare and seeing the gate, I just started laughing. You get off the plane, there's a bus waiting. It leaves within 5 minutes, and you're, sort of shuttled to this like magical resort. And everybody's just got that feeling of excitement on the bus. And you walk into this sort of grandiose hall where somebody places a lei around your neck, hands you a margarita. Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime is blasting as they give you your sort of welcome kit with like some Phish goodies, tote bag and towel and that sort of thing. Just arriving was the best experience. I mean, really, you couldn't script it better.
Greg, what was your impression of arriving to the venue, especially in comparison to the previous one in 2019?
This year it was the venue was a lot closer to the airport. So previous year it was at the Barcelo. It was about an hour ride by the bus to get there. This time's 10 minutes. I mean, most of the folks that picked up a beer couldn't even get through it before we were pulling up at the resort. I mean, the arrival is very similar. This, I think, was a little bit more of a grand affair this year. They really tried to scale everything up a little bit. Where he got a margarita, I got 2 beers and a taco while I was waiting to get checked into my room. And, they're really, the CID guys have figured this thing out. And they go out of their way to make it easy and enjoyable from the second you get there until the second you leave. Fantastic. And I got to say, I know we'll probably talk about the venue and the resort a little more, but this one was a step above for sure.
I totally agree that the staff did everything they possibly could to make it as easy as possible for all of us as guests. And you felt that. I agree with Chase. The minute you step off the plane and there are these buses waiting for you with guys trying to sell you beers, and you get on that bus or that shuttle and you're already home. Everyone is there. Even when you're waiting online to check in, you're, like you said, you're being handed margaritas. It's a large, brightly lit lobby. It's there's music playing in the back. Like you said, Chase, Talking Heads. Everyone is smiling in shorts in February, no less. And it's just this ultimate joy. Cappy, what were your impressions when you first landed and got to the resort?
Once we got out of the terminal and like onto the bus, it was just like, oh, right, this is a giant party. We had changed into our shorts and t-shirts, and coming from Boston, we were coming out of basically sleet and snow weather, and getting off and walking out and it's 80 degrees. I will never forget that feeling of walking out of the terminal and onto the bus with that weather.
And this is maybe more about all-inclusive resorts than it is about Phish, but isn't it nice to be under the illusion that you're getting all this stuff for free, even though you paid for it in tremendous amounts 8 months ahead of time?
That's exactly why you have to pay for it 8 months ahead of time. There is some joy to it, putting your wallet in the safe when you get there. And, having everybody there to wait on you the entire time.
I think it was a precursor to most of last year where I didn't have to carry a wallet in my pocket because I didn't go anywhere or have to really pay for things because I wasn't leaving my home. So there was the party pool and then the chill pool. Greg mentioned that like CID really nails it in that if you wanted to go and dance and, be around a bunch of loud music, you could do that really at any time, like during the day or after the shows. If you wanted to go and just chill and sit by a pool, they had those things demarcated like really exceptionally well.
And if you're the introvert of the group, our rooms were really nice.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we did not share a hot tub together, but
well, there's always
unlimited
next
nachos.
Year.
Yeah, unlimited nachos from room service. Whatever you want at the tip of your fingers is pretty great.
Right. And if you're not going to share a hot tub with a loved one, there's at least nachos, is what I always say. And so, looking up to the shows themselves, night one, could we get overall impressions of night one? Cappy, what did you think?
I was amazed at how long they played. That's the lasting memory I have from that. I remember waiting to go in and thinking that it was going to be, oh, here's a little warm-up set that we're going to get. And as it turned out, they just kept going. I remember they kept ending with closer after closer and thinking, oh, this is it. Oh no, they're going with another one. And by the time they got to You Enjoy Myself, I'm just like, are you kidding me? that was an impressive way to kick off the festival.
Yeah, I also kept thinking it was going to end. I woke up very early that morning. I traveled all in one day. So I think I was up at like 4 or 4:30 a.m. in New York. And my flight was at something like 6 or 7. I was at the airport so early. So that by the time they started, in my head, it was already like midnight. And I did not know how long that opening set was. They, I think, left the language intentionally vague. If I remember correctly, it said that they'll perform a special welcome set on the first night, and no one really knew what that meant. And like you said earlier, Chase, you said it was about over 3 hours, you think?
3 hours and 6 minutes, I think, was the total set run time. And, we talked about expectations a little bit earlier. I didn't really have any. 2019, I was at Alpine. I saw the MSG Tweezer, and really this set actually blew me away. I mean, like you said, it was basically a full Phish show, just all in one. And, they just kept coming with the hits, and you kept thinking it was going to close. They had that Landlady Into Destiny, which was a nice old throwback. Once Antelope fired up, you really thought it was over. Then Cavern, which again, you think it's over. And then they, still played a few more tracks and finished out with Yem. You can't really ask for anything better.
Greg, what were your thoughts on night one?
Yeah, we got there a day before the first show, so we had a lot of time to let our thoughts percolate. And there was, I don't want to say expectations, but a lot of speculation about what the welcome set might be. And it's safe to say that none of us thought it was going to be an entire Phish show, maybe even plus in some ways, because there was a point in the night where we're 2 hours in and they started playing Cross-Eyed and Painless. And at this point, my head's exploding. I'm like, I can't believe what's going on. And I remember just grabbing my cousin and saying, dude, this is the warm-up set. Imagine what the next 3 nights are going to be like. And of course, we wouldn't be let down. But such a great show, and very loose, kind of in the right ways. It was, you could say sloppy, but, I say it's loose because they were having fun. Fishman was cracking up. The MoMA dance in particular, I think that song is a good barometer for how the band is feeling and how they're going to play. And that's just how that one was. It had this really kind of a loose, funky vibe to it. It was just such a great way to kick off the week. Plus, I got 4 songs I'd never seen them play before in one set, which is just great for me.
One of the things I want to talk about, though, on this first night, which I think we'll get into the second night, which I think was the highlight of the run for a lot of people, was the Free into Shipwreck back into Free. For me, I think that was the best jam of the run. I think what's very eerie and creepy is that it very much sounds like the theme from 28 Days Later when they're going into Shipwreck. telling you, Trey knew. He knew.
I agree with you, Greg, that it was particularly loose. I mean, they opened with Torn and Frayed. You know, like they don't ever play that song. They have so many that they choose off Exile on Main Street, but not that one. And it's right away, it's something unexpected and it's something fun and it's something new for, I would guess, the majority of the people there. And more so than the music, although I agree with you, Chase, that Free Shipwreck Free was an outstanding jam. And so right away, we're hearing top tier jams. But even more than the music was the reality sinking in. You know, it's more than novelty. It's, I can't believe where we are and what we're doing. You know, we've all seen them in summer sheds, whether it's like Camden or like you said earlier, Greg, I think it was Deer Creek. And Chase, you mentioned Alpine Valley. We know what it's like to be inside a Phish show. This was not like being at a Phish show.
It's super weird to wake up when it's 5 degrees in Chicago and end the night in 85-degree Mexico, seeing your favorite band on the beach.
One of the odd parts that hit me was Beneath a Sea of Stars towards the end of that set. I think that's when it really sunk in. And that's, you know, that song's okay. That's not something I would say like, oh, I really hope I'm catching one of those. But it really fit the moment for me. And that's where I was, you know, just standing there, feet sinking into the sand, and you're looking up, you're like, oh, right. We're like a quarter of the way around the globe.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Beneath a Sea of Stars. It's growing on me quite a bit. I saw an excellent version at Mohegan Sun, I think it was the prior summer. But I was listening to all of these shows in anticipation of this recording, and I didn't realize until I re-listened just how many lyrical references there are to us all being in Mexico. And Beneath a Sea of Stars, there's a line that says, "We're all here together and the weather's fine." And knowing that now, like in retrospect, it makes me appreciate it even more, even though it's kind of cheesy. It's like, oh, if there's ever an appropriate time to sing those lyrics, it's there and now and there and then. So all of these references are wonderful. And also the landlady into Destiny Unbound. I think, Chase, you mentioned that, right? It made me think I was listening to a tape from the Gothic Theater in Colorado in 1991. You know, it had that old school feel. I thought night one was outstanding. What an opening set. And moving on to night two, then, I thought that it was so much fun. The Turtle in the Clouds opener, I thought that it kind of lacked the vigor from the previous night, but it picked up immediately with Plasma. Chase, what were your thoughts about night two, the Shafty night?
I loved it. Had never heard Shafty, I caught the Olivia's Pool, sort of alternate version of that song at Alpine, but, immediately, right in set one, I knew it was going on. And they just kept going back into it and kept teasing it, throughout the show. I loved the little tease at the end of the first set off the Possum, the Weekapaw encore into that shaft. I mean, it was just brilliant. It's just a fun. This is kind of what Phish is about: weaving something in, calling back to something they haven't played, and I don't even know when the last Shafty was, but many years. Loved it.
And Greg, you were here with your wife, your daughter, and your cousin, right? It was a family vacation.
Yeah, actually 3 cousins. I think this night too is the only show that all 4 of us kind of went to together too. We were all in the same little area there, and this for me was the highlight musically of the run. My note said, "Holy crap, Page Sense, Mike is a beast," and that's all I wrote. But what I really remember from the show were songs like "Blaze On," parts of "I Always Wanted It This Way" in a No Man's Land, where I felt like I was flying through space. 2001, same thing. I mean, really warped my mind. I had such a great time. And this is one, I joked that this show is the one that was built for my wife, because for years before she would go to shows and she would just hear me listening, she would always say, gosh, they play that Possum and 2001 song at every concert. So here they played them both in one show, almost one right after the other. I felt like this was the one where the looseness from the night before had set them up for it. But Trey was really locked. Trey in particular was just really dialed in this night. And I think that, you really saw that kind of come to a crescendo at the end of the night when he pushed from the sand jam into Weekapog at the end. And I mean, by that point, we had sort of moved over, and I remember I was standing in the ocean and I'm just jumping up and down like a lunatic.
'Cappy, what are your memories of night two?
So I just remember walking back from it and thinking like, oh, right. Like every time I go to a Phish show, I get reminded of something like, why do I go to see this? And this one had all of the pieces of it in terms of the playfulness, with going in and out of Shafty, in terms of the song selection. And what I get like, so Lizards is always a special one for me. I always feel like the solo at the end is Gamehenge's national anthem. The Bathtub Gin, that's one that's Carrie's favorite, and so she always is hoping to catch one there. So we got that. And then what will always be burned into my brain is when Sea and Sand kicked off, watching you move at about Mach 4 to get back in, Brian. But and then also I have to mention the Lifeboy as a person. Like that's probably,
I knew it was coming.
I know you knew it was coming.
The tears are flowing with Cappy during the Lifeboy.
It is probably my favorite Phish tune, certainly my favorite Phish ballad, and I've only had a chance to see it once or twice before. So to have them play it there was really special.
Sure. The two things that resonated with me about what everyone said, yes, Sea and Sand, it triggered something very deep in me. As I've mentioned on this podcast previously, before Phish, for me, there was The Who. And when I found out that that Phish covered Quadrophenia all those years back, when I was first getting into them, things started sparking in my head where it's like, oh my God, there's a connection between these two bands. You know, I knew so little at the time. And then when I got into New Year's 95 and I found, oh my God, they repeated a Who song. They played Sea and Sand again. And that version on New Year's 95 is immaculate. It's one of the best single song performances as far as just song structure goes that I've ever heard Phish play. And I just resigned myself to the idea that they'll never, ever play it, because every year in Mexico is the ultimate opportunity to play it. Where else would it be more appropriate? And they never did. So I was toward the back of the venue. I think I was getting a snack, like I was getting like a churro or something or a burger, but they kind of melted into Sea and Sand it was out of Blaze On, and they kind of melted into it. And I just transcended time and space and went from that back part of the venue to be right next to all of you. And I just kind of clutched my chest for a minute because I think I even called it on New Year's, actually, like on our message board. And it was the completion, the fulfillment of a dream that I didn't think would ever happen. And so that was very special to me.
Yeah, you did call that. And that was the fourth time they ever played it. They did it at the Rosemont. Mm-hmm. They played it in 95, obviously, and then once in 98. So 22-year gap.
All I really remembered in detail was the weaving of Shafty in and out of the set list. But when I listened back, I was pretty surprised that Shafty wasn't even really the focal point of this show. Like you mentioned, Greg, 2001 was huge. And so was Bathtub Gin.
Fantastic. I remember parts of the gin, and just to go back to the Sea and Sand for a minute. Mm-hmm. I remember where we were. We were getting some of that incredibly good hot cocoa.
Oh, yes.
And when you heard it play, you were talking to me and Carrie, and you heard it. I saw your eyes go as big as saucers, and it's Sea and Sand, and then it was like a cartoon where there's just a cloud of dust and you're gone.
It was in the moment is what mattered more than anything for me. I thought night 2 was great fun, tremendous, and it would be a highlight of any 4-night run. And moving on to night 3, I was getting a little tired, but we tried something new. Do you remember, Cappy? We moved kind of close to the stage and tried to hang for a while, like at the shore with our feet in the water.
Keyword is tried.
Yeah.
The fatigue was setting in a little bit. Our hotel room, Carrie and our hotel room, was in the Nizuc pool, which was the party pool, and we were overlooking it. So we had, the dance raves were going on until 2 or 3 in the morning.
Sorry to interrupt you, but let's talk a little bit about what post-show looked like at Riviera Maya. Before we even get into night 3, let's talk about what it was like as you left the show. I remember as you walked back toward the back area, there were those cool art and light installations. There was the big sand sculpture of the crab with the shoe in his mouth. And then you could either walk a little bit of a distance, I would guess, about a half mile to our area, maybe?
Not even.
Not even, or you could take, for like a couple bucks tip, you could take a golf cart to whatever area you wanted to go to. And you would first walk by the party pool, which was very loud, right? It was a big party. And there was this line of service workers literally holding out trays filled with drinks, with beers and mixed drinks. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was the best post show I've ever experienced.
It was nuts. I remember going back, and like I said, this was the Nizuc pool, which was right outside our hotel room. So we could literally, we do that 10-minute walk. I think just about every night we wound up crashing at the same table at that hut by the bar. We'd had margaritas and beers, and they were still serving. We didn't talk too much about the food, but like the only bad food I had there was some of the when they tried to Americanize the late night food, and they had like hot dogs and chicken fingers. I had that one night. I'd stay away, but all of the other food was fantastic. And how long did we stay there? We usually stay there for like an hour or two post show, just shooting the shit about the show and catching up. It was awesome.
By the third night, I wanted to write on my hand, "You don't need a burger." Because it was just so natural for me to walk over to that big line of buffet and be like, all right, give me everything you got. Because that's usually what I do post show, stuff my face and fall asleep. But yeah, we would have a couple drinks, stuff our faces, and just have polite conversation. It didn't even feel that late, even though it kind of was, but it felt like it was really easy to stay up all night if you chose to do so. Greg, what was your post show experience like each night?
Yeah, we had a room that was kind of set back about as far away from the beach as you could get, which turned out to be really nice because I'm one of those guys, when I'm ready to go to bed, I wanted to be quiet and I want to get some rest. But every night we walked by that long buffet that Cappy was just talking about. And this was a step up from the previous year, because the previous year after the show, you had to hunt down food. The restaurants were closed. If you didn't do room service, it wasn't such an easy gig. This time, like you, I'm having 2 hamburgers, one in each hand. Walk around with just a big smile on my face, especially, coming out of the shows where you just, had this, experience. It just such a good time hanging out there by the pool, sitting there on the edge of the pool, eating a burger, drinking some beers, sort of running down what had happened that day with everybody. It's such a good time. And it was kind of like they brought the lot, but then kind of made it sort of highbrow lot be there after the show. And it kind of had a continuity sort of to what we're used to in the Phish experience, but also made you really feel like you got your money's worth, which I think is their aim.
One thing I want to just kind of go back to, especially for people who are listening and haven't been to Mexico, was that not only were there waiters and people with drinks and food and things on the way out, but throughout the show, there are people, there are guys carrying trays of margaritas and beers all over the venue, just that you can just grab. A few of the nights I was maybe 10 rows back, they were up there, or when we were in the back, they were there. It was just, it's wild to just be at a show and have somebody just carting around a tray of margaritas for you to grab whenever you feel like it.
Am I imagining it, or were they in tuxedos?
They did have, they had almost like catering tuxedos.
100% in tuxedos.
And, I think the thing that you had to pay attention to was if you took 4 or 5 drinks off of that tray and you didn't want him to show up, the same guy with 4 or 5 drinks about 5 minutes later, you needed to tell him, because they kept coming back, especially if you were tipping them, which you should. And we learned that on night 3, actually. We were up on the bleachers and the guy kept coming and we just had a pool of drinks around us all the time. We couldn't even keep up with the way they're bringing them. Fantastic.
It really spoiled me forevermore.
And the food in the venue was fantastic.
It was excellent. Yeah.
So good. The hot chocolate, that might be the best hot chocolate I've ever had.
What were your thoughts about the opening of night 3, which was starting with Willin, which was a lot of fun with Fishman and his trademark Mexico, his gown. Willin, Tube, evening song, Set Your Soul Free, You Sexy Thing. And then it went from there. But what were your thoughts on night 3?
Yeah, I mean, the reason you haven't heard from me all that much about that first set was because I had a bit of fun at the pool and then took a siesta and woke up to my alarm about 10 minutes before set time in the room, which, as mentioned, was, a mile away from the venue, hauled ass to get to a golf cart and was basically running in the middle of Willen. So I wasn't so much analyzing the music as I was just trying to get back into the venue. Happens to the best of us in Mexico. But overall, I thought night 3 was great. It wasn't going to top night 2 for me. One of the surprises was that they actually did Tweezer Reprise as the encore that night. I figured, as Trey does, that he would save it for the final night. Mm-hmm. But absolutely love hearing Sweet Jane.
Greg, your thoughts on night 3?
Yeah, one of the things with the night 3 was, on night 2 during the Piper, it started to rain. And it got cold towards the end of that set, and all that the day before the third night, it was kind of cool. I mean, it was a little chilly in the pool. We were all warm, obviously, because
this is such a Southern viewpoint. Cold meaning what? It was 75 degrees.
Yeah. Well, there was a bit of a chill in the air.
The pool was cold. I'll back you up on that. The pool was cold.
As George Costanza would say, I was in the pool.
Yeah.
No, but listen, to me is, and I think generally when I've seen Phish do, 2 and 3 night runs, generally you get sort of like a rocker night and then a psychedelic night and then, maybe a sort of fun and goofy night. And this one, kind of had a little bit of everything, but in that second set, it became the psychedelic night. I mean, that waves that they played, I mean, there are just parts of that where it's mind bending. And, I remember the Tube, which really I didn't think it was the best, especially realistic. It's not the best version of Tube, but I remember standing there on the bleachers where I could see out over the crowd and there were Phish and they're jumping out of the water perfectly in sync with Fishman's hi-hat. And I remember grabbing my wife. I was like, oh my God, look at this. And, she's looking at me like, you're a moron.
Wait, so Greg, sorry to interrupt you, but this was the psychedelic night for you?
I felt like it was, musically speaking, for sure. But so maybe it was the psychedelic night for the band.
I agree with you about Tube. I think it's so flexible. I've seen great versions of Tube. I've seen passable versions of Tube. And I thought this one, when I was re-listening to it, it really made me think that we all got robbed of an incredible Phish year in 2020. When you listen back to Tube, yeah, it might not be the tightest, greatest version in the world, but they did put a bit of a jam in there. Yeah, that is worth re-listening. And it made me think that in a parallel universe, if only things went differently in 2020 and Phish was able to maintain the sort of vibration and energy and vibe that they set the precedent for during Mexico, Tube made me think we all got robbed.
Tube is also, that's sort of the song where they've mastered the micro jam. If you listen back the last couple, Mexico 19, I really personally enjoyed the one from Merriweather in the summer of 19. That's the one where, I mean, they just get there so quick, and it can make you feel so many things in those 3-4 minutes that they jam it out. And I'm with you on that. I think it's a good tone setter.
I was just going to say, I think it was after the Tube that we decided to wander back and take our places back in our home base.
Which was right in front of the bleachers, by the way. For anyone listening, we spent most of the time, which was just back behind the soundboard and a little bit to the right, facing the stage, right in front of the bleachers.
And just so everybody knows, there were bleachers, right? This was basically like the old folks' home for the show, right? You're sitting there, you're on a full open beach, but they pop up a set of bleachers in the back, for people who don't want to necessarily like just be on a flat surface, and so you can actually see the full show.
They open with Willin'. That's one of my favorite songs written by anyone ever. I was at Halloween 2010 when they covered Waiting for Columbus, and it didn't sink in with me until about halfway through the set, the Waiting for Columbus set, that I would see, I have this experience, as I mentioned, with Sea and Sand, my favorite band playing one of my favorite songs by one of my other favorite bands. And I really loved that they played Willin' again. And I had the immediate thought after, it's good that they don't play it that much, because it's such a great song. I would hate for it to become a joke song.
Wasn't Fishman in a suit for that?
He was in like a Jimmy Buffett sort of style suit.
With sunglasses.
Yeah.
You know what was amazing? The Fishman sounded great on that song.
Sure he did, yeah.
Nailed it. I was so impressed.
I remember mostly that from night 3, and I remember the Manteca.
Yeah, Manteca came out of Tweezer.
And I also remember we were talking about the fatigue setting in.
Mm-hmm.
They had that. Did you guys take advantage of that lounge area they had in the back? So this is like well outside the venue, where they just set up additional PA speakers, a video screen, and had about 200 lounge chairs. That's where we spent like the last song. I think we spent A Life Beyond the Dream, Harry Hood, Sweet Jane, and the reprise back there.
And that's where the Manteca's sculpture was, right?
I think so, yeah.
Right, yeah. Which they had only added the crab, I think, that day. It was just a shoe prior to that.
I spent some time back there, Cappy, this night also. I don't remember clearly if you and I with Carrie hung out or if we just kind of separately made our way back there. I made my way back there during Chalkdus Torture. When Greg said that waves, you started this whole part of the conversation with waves being very psychedelic. It was very loose. It was a lot to take in. And I enjoyed it very, very much. And Carini got dark, as it usually does. And right in the middle of Chalkdus Torture, I started to say, I got to sit down a little bit. I got to just kind of regroup. And as I walked toward the back of the venue and it got less and less crowded, that's where I saw this area of all the chaise lounges and all the wicker furniture and the big screen and the beautiful sound, but you could hear the waves crashing too. And I sat down toward the end of Chalkdus Torture, and that's when they started Have Mercy, which I had been chasing for my whole Phish going career up to that point.
Did you run back up front?
No, not this time. It wasn't the Who. It wasn't the same. but I was thrilled with it. And then when they encored with Sweet Jane and Tweezer Reprise, that's a hell of a way to close the third night of a 4-night run. And so the next day is the last night. Starts with night 4. I know they said they were starting early. I don't remember because I was pretty tired by this point. I do have a memory of in the middle of the afternoon, sitting by the pool, reading a book and just ordering a Prosecco. And I just felt very at peace with everything. I knew it was the end of it. I knew this was an experience unlike anything I had before. And I just tried my hardest to let it sink in.
I totally agree with you, Brian. And by night 4, it's like, oh, this is your life now. You live in Mexico. You go see Phish every night. You wander over to the venue. At this point, you're seeing sort of characters that you've met throughout the day and evening all over the place. It's the community kind of comes alive, and it feels like it's our community, right? It's super welcoming, and you've got the lay of the land for sure. But you just kind of think to yourself, how do I go back to my normal life after this? Like, that was night 4 for me.
That's the question after every festival, I feel like.
Yeah. And it had that vibe of a festival, right? I mean, it was like Chase just mentioned, festivals are usually 3 days, right? Sunday night is always the last show, the last night. You arrive either late Thursday or early Friday morning, typically, for a festival. And the first day is very overwhelming. It's all novel, and you're excited to meet up with people and meet new people. And you kind of start to track down all the little surprises the band has hidden around the grounds. The second day is when you're like, okay, let's make the most of it. And then Sunday, by the time you're ready to leave the festival, it's appreciate what we have because tomorrow it will all be gone. And that's what this felt like that Sunday.
The saddest part for me, Carrie and I stayed an extra day. We put a day on the back end to sort of unwind and collect after this. And I'm glad we did that in some ways, but it was also really
big mistake.
Yeah. They wound up breaking down. We saw cranes on the beach carrying the sculptures away. The music, which had, it had been curated music by the bunny DJs blasting over the pool.
You're talking about the speakers by the pools.
Yeah. So they had been blasting great music all weekend. The day after, it went back to like cheesy resort fair music. And
parrot heads everywhere.
Yep. And I know we're saying we're the old folks. So I feel like the median age went up by about 30 years by the next day. So it was a real culture shock after that. But, at the same time, I say like, oh, how do we go back to our lives? How can we stop doing this? This is our life now. I don't know that I would have survived another 4 nights of that.
During night 4, Trey summed it up for me. There was a pause in Divided Sky. It was about halfway through the first set after Breath and Burning. And there during the pause in Divided Sky, which is uniformly silent every time you see it, Trey, you could hear it in his voice.
This is fucking unbelievable. I mean, come on. Seriously? Yes. Let's do a concert here. This is ridiculous. Sorry, not to break the silence, but... Hey, people in the water.
And to me, I don't think it could have been summed up better. It was just complete disbelief. And it was a little different from the previous nights in that the sunlight lasted longer because the show started earlier. It was just such a wonderful feeling.
It really was. That's also what he called the fans mediocre.
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch of mediocre looking people. But he meant it as a compliment, he says.
Happy to be part of it.
And I also remember if you listen to first set for night 4, imagine that they played this at Merriweather Post. Imagine that they played this at the Gorge, right? Picture this set list on paper, seeing it on your phone or whatever. Crowd Control opener, Farmhouse, Breath and Burning. Imagine that trio of opening songs. What do you think the internet would have to say? The Peanut Gallery would have to say for that?
Yeah, who cares? I mean, I'll be the first guy to say, like, I love the dad rock. I like the new batch of songs they've come up with. I think it's great. You can't imagine what it's like unless you're there. And I spent all a night in the ocean. Went in there with the idea that, look, I told my daughter, we got to go do this. And it was absolutely the best part of all of the show experiences was standing down there, watching my favorite band, kind of in that zone where, Chase was talking about that, you get used to this being your life and now it's going to end. And so you go in with this sort of conscious notion that I'm going to enjoy this no matter what happens. This is going to be the best time of my life today. And absolutely, it so was. I mean, Breath and Burning, not a fantastic song, but if you are going to see it, you want to see it on the beach, standing with your feet in the water, eating a taco. It's an amazing thing to have there. And so I think you're right. On paper, people would talk bad about it, but as we all know with this band, you can't look at the set list on paper and understand what it was like to be there.
And during this first set, I remember thinking that I would be jaded about the first few songs if this were any other show, even if I were there. If this were the first night of a New Year's run, I'd be like, oh, man, I should have skipped tonight and just started on the 29th, for example. But being in a total state of bliss where we were all laid back and it was a collective energy that you felt both from the band and the audience, it just Breath and Burning actually really did sum up that vibe for me. It feels like a beachfront song. It would not be out of place on a beach mix.
The beach is very forgiving in terms of what it does to the mood of songs.
1,000%.
Yeah, and I'll be the first person to say that I do not care for the dad rock necessarily, but I also just felt that same sort of feeling. I was just enjoying myself. I mean, it's at that point in a run like this, you're just you're happy to be there.
And in some ways, given how tired I know I was at that point, I'm like, in my head, there was part of me just going, just take it easy on me tonight, Phish, please. like I can't handle too much. We've already been through a lot. Let's have a nice, calm, smooth, loose, playful evening. Don't get too intense. Don't get too crazy. And I felt like that was sort of the mood, at least of the first set. And I remember the Everything's Right. Like, that was probably the highlight of the first set for me. It was loose, it was exploratory, but it wasn't, like, I wouldn't say it was pushing the boundaries of anything, but it had that playfulness.
It was very solid. Everything's Right and Simple for me were the two best songs played that night. And the second set, you were right, Cappy, that the first set, they did kind of take it easy on all of us because that was just the vibe in the air. The second set wasn't so easy it was very much the heads set. It was that Simple into Golden Age, Fuego, Undermine, Back on the Train, and then Passing Through, which I do not recognize. Still don't.
Passing Through was the highlight for me. Those Kazvat Box songs that I don't know if it's been played more than once or twice.
I think this was only the second time it was played. I'll double check that when I do the fact check, but I believe this is the only time other than that Halloween show.
I think that was a song, like Cappy or somebody mentioned about Breath and Burning. It's meant to be on the beach. I think that one fit the spot. The placement was perfect, and it was a good kind of I don't know, like a togetherness type of song, with the sort of police-like vocals coming in and out of there, and it came after a pretty strong set of jamming. I mean, if you look back at the Simple, the Golden Age, even the Undermine that segued into Back on the Train. I mean, it was a really fun second set. Lots of teases. I mean, I think I heard, Simple teased in a couple of songs, and there was a Inagata Davida in there, and just it had everything that you want, I think. And I felt like
that Simple had a Under Pressure tease too, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but even though with that really heavy jamming second set that I loved, that was one of my favorite sets of the weekend. A 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 song encore.
One thing that I did anticipate was a long encore on night 4, and clearly they didn't disappoint. Loved the Fee, which is now a rarity. They play it maybe once a year. Trey through the megaphone. That was great. I was shocked and appalled that they ended with more. But, that's just me. But really a great closer to a great run.
I really enjoyed More, and I'm pretty jaded. I also, like you, Chase, I err on the side of not liking the dad rock, but I just think it's a matter of Stockholm syndrome. I think after a while, if I'm around these songs long enough, I begin to like them despite my earlier self. There's part of me that still thinks a song I heard the Ocean sing is a new song. And so a lot of these newer songs, whether it's on Sigma Oasis or if it's Ghosts of the Forest, I'm still getting my head wrapped around them, but More has an undeniable power. You could tell that it's coming straight from Trey's heart. It speaks to a lot of sobriety. A lot of friends I know who are in recovery, they really love it more than anything because it speaks right to them. And I have a feeling when you look at a crowd in Mexico, I think there's a lot of people who that can resonate with. And I think it's a powerful closer, even if I don't particularly like the song. I call it the light corollary. It's that the songs that they love the most, that I like the least, usually produce the best jams. And that started in 2009 for me with Light. Didn't like Light, still kind of don't, but it's impossible to deny the quality of the jams and the energy that it brings to a set list. So I thought More was a really good closer. And I thought night 4, usually that's kind of the leftovers. That didn't happen this time. So to wrap this all up, we've kind of covered a lot of ground, but let's go to a lightning round. I'm going to put a question or a fill in the blank kind of sentence to each of you, and we'll like to go around to fill in your answer. So question 1 on the lightning round. If I did Mexico all over again, this time I would blank. Chase?
Oh man, I'm first. Nothing. I wouldn't change a thing.
Greg?
2 more days at the end. 1 on the front, 2 on the back.
Cappy?
What Greg said. Same thing. Just more of it.
I agree. I would book a day after the show to decompress. That wake up, not the next day, but the day after that, when I had to go back to work, that was one of the hardest wake ups of my professional career by a lot. It was a terrible whiplash.
I will. Okay. Yeah. Take the next day off. I will 100% agree with that. But Once the show's over, I want to get out of there. I don't want to see. I don't want to see them taken down the stage. It's too sad.
Yeah, that kind of wrecks your dreams a little bit. Next question. Most important thing to pack, Greg?
If you're going to have fun like I did, you need at least 2 or 3 pairs of sunglasses because you are going to lose them on night one.
Cappy?
Sunglasses and sunblock.
Chase?
I'm going to go with flip-flops.
I would have 2. I would say a power strip or an extension cord because there are not enough outlets in the hotel rooms for this specifically. I would also say maybe your own little tumbler because they'll fill it. You know, they give very small size drinks. They give you like medicine cups of margaritas. You want to fill that up. So bring your own cooler mug or whatever you got.
That's right. Can we actually stop and talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
That was my day 2 lesson. And I think it was you that had taught me that. I saw people walking around with giant plastic tumblers. And I asked you, and you had one. You're like, oh, you can get it at the hotel shop. And they'll just fill your drinks because it's all inclusive. Put your beer in that. Put your margarita in that. I would go back and say that's what I should pack.
Yep.
A giant tumbler.
So hypothetical situation. If you could go again, but then you would have to skip all other Phish shows that year, would you do it or not? Chase, would you?
No. I saw too many great shows in 2019.
Greg, would you?
Absolutely. Most years I'm only getting to see, a few shows anyways, whatever is close by. So I would do it in a heartbeat.
Cappy, if you could go to Mexico again, but that meant you'd have to trade any other Phish show you'd see that year, would you go?
That's what I did in 2020.
Well, I guess that's true. I said I'm not sure. And then I said yes. And my reasoning is, and I tend to see a lot of shows in a given year, especially the New Year's runs, which are my favorite. I think that a lot of the shows now, almost all of them are webcast. And I think I could replace in my mind what it would be like to be there while watching it on my couch in my apartment. Mexico, I don't think that's the case. I think the discrepancy, and dare I use the term attendance bias, the discrepancy between being there and seeing it on your TV is wider for Mexico than it would be for anything else, including festivals.
By far.
So I would not make that trade.
So much of that experience is the fact that you're in it constantly. I mean, it is like a festival, but it's like a festival to the next level. That's kind of what I picture like heaven being like. In the morning, I go to a prepared breakfast. I have people feed me drinks all day, and then I see Phish at night.
And then you wake up the next day and do it all over again.
I mean, if I could be stuck in Groundhog Day on night 2, I'd have no problem with it.
Surrounded by the coolest people too. I mean, that's one of the things I will always take away from that. It's that festival vibe where you feel like you could just high five anyone walking around. But it's like you don't know anyone there, but you know everyone there. And that's the coolest feeling. It's what I love about the festivals, except here we were just doing it in a place where we could all be much cleaner on a daily basis.
Yeah, and there's no nitrous mafia. There's none of the bad element. It may sound kind of shitty, but really, it's all just kind of positivity. There's nobody there for any other reason than really seeing the music.
So before we wrap this all up, any last thoughts that didn't come up in conversation? Anything you wanted to say about Phish in Mexico that we didn't come around to? That this is your shot. Anybody?
I'd like to just say it's not as great as we all just talked about. Don't believe people that tell you it's the best thing ever, because I don't want to have a hard time getting a good room next year. And I'm counting on 2022.
Cappy?
When the next one happens, I am definitely there. I've already received permission. I don't know if Carrie's going to go next year, but whether she does or not, I'm in any time that this happens in the future going.
Chase, any last words?
Yeah, I'd echo Greg. Don't go. I know that I myself will never miss one of these runs again. It's really like nothing else.
And just one more thing that I would like, if I were summing this up, the way I was thinking about this was that it's a once in a lifetime experience that I can't wait to do every year that it happens.
Well said. So let's wrap it up, gentlemen. Thank you so much for doing this, for being here. I don't know the next time we'll all get together again for Phish, but I hope it's sooner than later. Fingers crossed. And for everybody listening, take some time, go to phish.in, re-listen to these shows, close your eyes, picture yourself there, and we hope to see you there next time on the beach. Well, that was a big conversation, a lot of reminiscing, a lot of stories, a lot of opinions. And it wouldn't be a full-on Phish conversation if we didn't have an attendance bias fact check. Toward the beginning of today's conversation, Cappy mentioned that his first show was in 1991 at Arrowhead Ranch in Parksville, New York. Phish played 2 nights at the now-defunct venue that year on July 20th and July 21st. Any fan who got into the band in the tape collecting days almost certainly had a tape of that July 21st show that featured the giant country horns. Even though he wasn't aware of what he was seeing at the time, Cappy was at both shows. He then mentioned that his first show where he was all in was in 1993. That show was on February 12th, 1993 at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie, New York. That show is chock full of gags and setlist notes, including alternate lyrics to You Enjoy Myself from the Donny X Vice newsletter, secret language signals, and a second set closing harpua. Both Arrowhead Ranch and the Poughkeepsie shows are available on phish.in. Greg says that his first show was at the Hampton Coliseum in 1996. That show was on October 25th of that year as part of the band's fall run. Toward the beginning of today's episode, there was a little confusion about how long the band played on the opening night of their Mexico welcome set. According to the recording on phish.in, the music itself was exactly 2 hours and 30 minutes, which was about 20 minutes to a half hour shorter than the other 3 nights. While talking about night 2, Chase mentions that he did not remember the last time the band played Shafty, since they played it approximately 4 times weaved in and out of the show that night. Before night 2 of Mexico, the band last played Shafty at Bonnaroo 2012, which was on June 10th of that year. While I was gushing over Sea and Sand from night 2, Chase mentioned that the last time the song was played was in 1998. More specifically, the band played it on July 20th, 1998 at the Ventura County Fairgrounds in California. It appeared in the second set after Maze and before Prince Caspian. Fun trivia, the band opened that set with Drowned, so Sea and Sand was the second song from Quadrophenia to appear in that set, which is the only time that's happened since Halloween 1995. Finally, while discussing Night 4 of Mexico, Greg said that the Kasvot Vaxxed song Passing Through was the highlight for him, and I erroneously said that this was the second time the band has played it after Halloween 2018. In fact, this was the 4th time that Passing Through was played. The other times were its debut in Halloween 2018, New Year's Eve 2018, and June 21st, 2019 at the PNC Music Pavilion in Charlotte. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank everybody, Cappy, Greg, and Chase for joining me to reminisce and take a look back at Mexico 2020. Thank you, of course, for listening to Attendance Bias. Thank phish.in, and thank you to phish.net for providing everything we needed for today's episode. And if you enjoy Attendance Bias, please leave a review, subscribe anywhere on your preferred podcast app of choice. And do me a favor, take it one more step and recommend the show to just one person you see this week. Tell them, text them, whatever you can do, just spread the word about the show. Thank you, as always, for listening to Attendance Bias, and I'll see you next time.